Hello everyone. In this video we are going to use Excel to help us build and interpret frequency tables. So here we have this problem where we are given some data from our boss on the ages of paying customers at his ice cream shop. He asks you to summarize it, and seeing as he's not giving you a bunch of direction, you decide to use some simple frequency tables, and here's the data. So the first thing that we need to do is transfer our data from MyOpenMath to Excel. So let's go ahead and look at our data. So we have customer age, their gender, and their satisfaction level. In order to copy it, we can select our data, and then you can drag down to select data, but much faster is to just drag off to the side, and it will select all of the data. And then we can copy our data, and then we can paste it in Excel. Now, if we do just a standard like Control V and paste, notice all of our data gets pasted into a single cell. It's not very useful. So one thing that we need to do is we can do a right click, and we can go to Paste Special, click on Text, click OK, and now we have the data just as we see it in MyOpenMath. So as we can also see, we have some overspill or some overflow from column C to column D. If we don't want that to happen, we can go click right in between column C and D and do a double click, and also double click between column A and column B right at the top, and it will automatically resize your data so that it actually looks real nice. Okay, and let's kind of resize my screen just a little bit, and let's get rid of our data in MyOpenMath. Okay, so does data always get pasted in the correct format? And the answer is no. Doesn't always happen. Sometimes we need to do paste special. We're going to come back to question 2 because it will be more applicable in just a second. Okay, here. So the next one is we're going to deal with some labels and some symbols, and so we want to talk about what are the names for this thing right here. So when we're dealing with numerical data and frequency tables, these are called bins, or the bins for where we are going to start counting our data. They are called bins, they are called ranges, and sometimes they are even called a class. Okay, now as you can see, when we look at this bin, I typically use the word bin, we have both brackets and we have parentheses. Okay, so they mean different things. A parenthesis here means that we are going to exclude the value, so that'll be C. But if it's a bracket here, that means that we are going to include the value, so that's the letter E. So if you see two brackets, that's going to be a closed interval. That means that we include both the top and the bottom. So if we see two parentheses, that is an open interval. If we have a lower parenthesis and an upper bracket, that's going to be an open lower, closed upper. That's going to be B. And finally, with a bracket on the bottom and a parenthesis on the top is a closed lower, open upper. And that is going to be D. Now in Excel, what Excel does is does the open, lower, closed, upper. Different software actually do frequency tables a little bit different, so sometimes you have to go in and see exactly how they're doing the frequency tables. And it's not necessarily that one is right and one is wrong. Some are more common than the others, but you just have to know what you're dealing with so you can understand your interpretations. Okay, next we're going to kind of match some vocab. So nominal is categorical data with no natural order, C. Ordinal data is categorical with a natural order. And numerical data is data dealing with numbers. Okay, and the reason why we create frequency tables is to find patterns, to simply summarize the data, and it really is all of them are valid answers. Okay, so at this point we are ready to actually do a little bit of investigation into our data. We're not going to quite do a frequency table yet, but we're going to start off with just some descriptive statistics. So I'm going to come back to Excel, and remember that we are going to be utilizing the add-in package, the RealStat add-in package, and we have already installed it here. And if we push Control M, a little pop-up window will pop up. And this is what it looks like. It's called Real Statistics. And the first one that we want to do is we want to just grab some descriptive statistics. We want to know what's the maximum and what's the minimum, because those things can help us decide our bin sizes when we are building our frequency table. So I'm going to create this for my descriptive statistics. I'm just going to click OK. And we should get another pop-up window. And for our options for this one right now, the only thing that I want to see are the descriptive statistics. So we can remove all of those checkboxes. And I do want to keep this checkbox in where it says that the column headings are included with the data. Now, the last thing that we need to do is select an input range and an output range. I've already got this output range of D1 selected. That's totally fine. Just remember the output range needs to be not covering up any of your data, because if you try to make the data and then you paste over top of it and then it deletes it, it doesn't work. It's bad. So let's get our input range. So in the input range, I'm going to select A1, and then I'm going to use on my keyboard this keyboard shortcut, Control, Shift, and the down arrow key. And it will select all of that instead of me having to like drag and drop the whole way down. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and click OK. And here I've got my descriptive statistics now. So it's given me that my maximum is 54, my minimum is 22, and then I've also got lots of other things. I've got means, I've got standard errors, I've got lots of handy information. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I am going to start by writing up my bins for my frequency table. So I'm just going to write bin. And because my minimum is at like 22, I'm going to start off with my bin at like 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, and 60. I think my biggest one is 54. So this should cover everything. Now, Excel is looking just for the second value in a bin. So let's use an example of a bin real quick. So we could do something like this, where we're going to do parenthesis 10, comma, 20, closed. Okay, so this bin right here is actually what is happening in this cell right here with this frequency. It's actually looking at, this is the top and this is the bottom. So if we were to include like the bottoms in each of these bins, we could do 0, 10, 20, 30, 40, and 50. So that we would know kind of the upper and the bottom. But in order to actually do this little function, we actually only need to include the top part, because that's just what Excel needs. What we're going to do is we're going to go right next to this 10 value, and I'm going to hit equals, and I'm going to type out frequency, Frequency. Now, in order to actually do this, I do the frequency and then add in a parenthesis, and now it's giving me a little bit extra more information. Or if I'm partway through typing out frequency, I can just come down and click on this option, and it will finish it up. Now it tells you what two things it needs. It needs first the data array and then the bins array. So we'll give it to it. First thing that we're going to give it is the data array. So I'm going to click on the data, which is from A2. I'm going to do Control Shift down to select everything. I'm just going to do a comma, and now I'm ready to select the bins array. And the bins array is just right here from, like, what is it, H3 down to H8. I'm going to end a parenthesis, and I'm going to hit enter. And it has now provided everything that I need. Notice how from the bin, from 0 to 10, there was 0, 10 to 20, there was 0, 20 to 30, there were 19, 30 to 40, 90, 40 to 50, 86, 50 to 65, and then you get this trailing 0, and what that really means is 60 plus. Like, was there anything over 60? And there wasn't here. Okay, so we would label this as like our frequency. All right, so if we go back up to question 2, the basic code for making our basic frequency table is just clicking the equals frequency parenthesis. Okay, so now we're ready to actually answer some of these questions. So the first one is, how many customers had an age in the range of 30 to 40? So if we look at our range from 30 to 40, we have 90 customers that were in that range. Okay, and then we have actually 2 questions here dealing with frequencies of dealing with our gender and our satisfaction. We'll come back and deal with those in a little bit. Let's answer question 4. So this question says, how many of the customers had an age of more than 40? Okay, so if we actually look at the one for more than 40, what we are going to be dealing with is we need to be looking at these 2. Because 40 ends right here with our 90, and so it's just these 2 combined. We have 86 from 40 to 50, and 5 from 50 to 60. When we add those 2 together, we get 91. Okay, now when we're also doing frequency tables, like there are some other columns that we can actually add in, and I want us to actually do these. The other ones that we need are the relative frequency. We need the cumulative frequency, and then we want the cumulative relative frequency. We'll just do freak. Okay. In order to do those, we are going to do we need a couple of things. So the first thing that we need is the total sample size, or how many people were in our sample. Now we could just go look at the data and we know that it's 200, but we can also add this up just from our frequency calculations here. So there's another little equation that we're going to do. So it's going to be equals sum, and then we put in a parenthesis. So the equals sum allows us just to select the range for which we want to, let's try that again. We're going to select the range for which we are interested in. And it give us that this total was 200. All right, so that's going to be a really important thing for us, because I want to now calculate the relative frequency. The relative frequency, when we equal it, it's going to be the number of people in the specific bin, or the frequency. So I could type in 0 divided by 200. So the relative frequency for that first one is 0. The relative frequency for the second one would be also equals 0 divided by 200. And then we could go down to this one. This one actually has something. We could do 19 divided by 200. And we could keep on going down. Now that's kind of the slow way to do it. And also, like, what happens if we accidentally calculated this wrong and instead it was really 195? Well, we could actually fix that much faster if we use references in Excel. So let's go ahead and try to do one of those references. Here's what we're going to do. So we're going to still push the equal sign, but instead of typing out the numbers, we're going to click on the numbers. So I want to divide this 0 divided by the total 200 right here. And if I hit enter, it'll still calculate that as 0 to 200. But what I can do is I can also do what's called propagation. I can click on this bottom corner, and you see how my cursor changes from this big white plus to a small thin black plus. If I now click on this and I drag it down, I can actually keep the equation going. The problem is I have a problem. All of a sudden it says you're dividing by 0. It's like, how am I dividing by 0? I thought I was dividing by 200. Well, let's click on the cell to see what happened. If I double click on this, look, it's now dividing 0, but it's dividing it by what was supposed to be 200, but the reference moved down. So we can actually lock our references in. So if you want something to float, you just leave it alone and it will be a reference. If you want something to stay permanent, you can lock it. And the easiest way to push is the button F4 on your keyboard. And if you put F4 on it, it puts a $sign before the letter, in this case I, and a $sign before the number, in this case 10. So I'm going to hit enter on that. And now I'm going to go to that corner again, to that thin black plus, and I'm going to drag it all the way down. Now we can double click and see what happened. Now it's doing 90 divided by 200. If I double click on this one, now it's doing 86 divided by 200. So one more time, let me show you how I actually got to that point. So I'm going to go to this top cell. I'm going to hit equals this frequency, 0, divided by 200. And before I do anything, I'm just going to push F4 because I don't want this 200 to move. I want it always to be dividing by 200. So I hit enter, and then I can click and drag it down. Okay, great. So now the cumulative frequency is just a running total. Now there's a couple of ways how to do this. There's some easy ways, there's some harder ways. I'm going to show you a way that we can do it in Excel that's like easy, and then one way that we can do it that's like I think is really cool, but it does take a little bit more not programming, but we have to write in a little bit of an equation. So we'll do it two ways. So remember, the cumulative frequency is really just a running total. You take the line that you're on and you add everything before it. So the first one, for our cumulative frequency, it's just going to be equal to the original frequency, to this first frequency, because there's nothing before it. Okay. Then from here, what we can do is we can just say, okay, now it's going to be equals to the row that we're on, the frequency of the row that we're on, plus everything before it. And if I hit enter, and now I can draw this second one, oopsies, I can drag this second cell down, and notice how it adds up to 200, because that's our total. If it adds up to over 200, you know you've done something wrong. So in order to do this one, we had to write two equations, right? We had to do this little first one equals I3, and then this one is going to equal to the row that we're on plus everything above it in the cumulative frequency. So that's one way that you can do it. There's another way that we can do this cumulative frequency. Let's do it like, oh, give me just a second. There we go. Okay, there's one other way that we can do it. We can say equals sum, and we can do click on this first cell, comma, let's see if I can remember how to do this. Click on this first cell again, and I think it is, oh, hold on, nope. You know what? I will post this one in a additional slot, so because I have forgotten exactly the steps of how to do it. So let's go back to this easy part. We're going to say equals frequency here, and then equals this frequency plus the cumulative above it, and we'll drag it down, and we'll just leave it at that because it's simple and it works. All right, so the cumulative relative frequency is very similar to the frequency. The only thing that is different is here is we're going to say equals, and instead of using the frequency and dividing by the total, we're now going to do the cumulative frequency and divided by the total. So click on the cumulative frequency divided by the total. Don't forget to lock it using the button F4. We can hit enter, and then we can drag this whole thing down, and the last number in it should be 1, because when you're at the end, it should be 100%. So this is how we build a frequency table in Excel. The actual frequencies, Excel will count out, and then we have just a little bit of math, basically just equations in order to set up to finish this out. Okay, but that's how we do a frequency table. Now, we also have these two other frequency tables. We can build frequency tables with categorical data as well, but there's actually some really cool tools that we can use inside of Excel. So let me resize this real quick. So the first one, it says, what % of the customers identified as male? That's an interesting question. Let's see what we can do. So if we go to our insert button right here, there's something that's called a pivot table. You don't need to know like the lingo of what it is, but this is what we're going to use. We're going to click on a pivot table. And then it says, okay, we need a table range and we need a location of where we want to put this. So the table range that we're interested in is, I just want to grab a gender because it's asking us about male identification. So I'm going to click on this, we're going to click on B1 and then do our Control-Shift down arrow. And then I got to tell it where I want it to put this pivot table. And I'm going to put this pivot table right below my frequency table. Oops, I did not click over to the location. So let me select my data again. And then let's scroll on up. This time I will click on here, and I'm going to put it right underneath, and I'm going to go ahead and click OK. So now it has this pivot table, and now we have some options. I'm going to click on gender here. Let's see. I'm going to click on gender, and it put it down in the rows, but I also want gender to be in the values. And look what it gave me. It gave me this nice little frequency table of our gender identification and the counts. And if I click on this little button, I can do cool things. I can sort it A to Z. I can sort it Z to A if I want. These pivot tables are really, really handy. So I built a pivot table for that, and let's build one more pivot table. Let's go Insert, Pivot Table. Let's select a range for our satisfaction this time. And I'm going to click OK. And for this one, again, we're going to click on satisfaction, and we're going to drag satisfaction also over to the values. And look how we have from extremely dissatisfied all the way to extremely satisfied, and we have all of our information again. Okay, so in here it's asked for us what's the percentage of customers that identified as male. Well, what we can do, all it's wanting us to do is take the number of males, 80, divided by 200. Now, don't get crazy about how it says like get pivot table and all that. You don't need to like really understand that. If that really bothers you and you're like, oh, I don't like any of that, you can always just type out 80 divided by 200. And there is 40% of customers identified as male. And yep, there we go. Now it says how many of the customers had a neutral or worse experience. Okay, so we have neutral, dissatisfied, or extremely dissatisfied. So we need to figure out how to do those things. Well, let's use some of the tools that we have. We could build another contingency table, and we could figure this out using like the cumulative relative frequency. But let's just say that we stopped right here. Now, real quick pivot. Remember that this entire frequency table, we could also build that for our ordinal data. It actually makes sense if we build it out with the ordinal data. It doesn't make sense to build it out on the nominal data, because the nominal data has no meaningful order. Okay, but for here, let's say I'm looking for neutral, dissatisfied, and extremely dissatisfied. So in order to find that, I would say equals, that would be the sum of all of the, let's try again. It would be the sum of from H19 to H21. And I'm going to now divide by 200. And if I hit enter, it says that 72 or 71.5% had a neutral or worse experience. But notice, I made a mistake. This question asks for how many of the customers had a neutral or worse experience, not what the percentage of them were. So I made it relative, and it wanted an absolute count. So let's get rid of this division part right here, and there's 143. So let's kind of do a quick review of what we did. So step one of what we did is we imported our data into Excel. Number two is we built descriptive statistics. Number three is we built our frequency tables using this equation called frequency. And then the last thing that we did is we included pivot tables, which are essentially frequency tables for categorical data for both gender identification and satisfaction level. Okay, that's our first video on guides on how to use Excel to make a frequency table. Good luck on your assignments.